Hello, everyone, and welcome to another installment of our Convention of States Michigan podcast. I am your host, Robin Riddell. I'm also the State Communications Coordinator here in Michigan, and I'm joined by my co-host, Kelly Oldford.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Robin. I'm Kelly Oldford. I'm a district captain for Convention of States here in Michigan. I work with Robin's team. I'm doing a lot of communication stuff. You might see me on our Facebook live streams as part of our communications team. So thank you, everyone, for joining our Convention of States Michigan podcast. And thank you for joining us as we take a deep dive into Michigan-specific topics, the work of Convention of States and everything that we're doing here in Michigan, and how the federal government exercises authority over Michigan's sovereignty. So we have a very interesting and very Michigan-specific topic for all of you today. So we're very excited to bring it to you.
All right. Our guest today is Troy Oldford. He is the owner of Oldford and Associates, a sales agency and small business in Port Huron, Michigan. Troy is an engineer and has been working in the automotive industry in Michigan and all over the Midwest for more than 10 years. He's also Kelly's husband. Thanks for joining us, Troy.
Thank you, Robin. It's great to be here. As you mentioned, we're manufacturers representative agency, so we represent manufacturing companies at specific customers that don't necessarily have an inside sales force. So we help design car parts and ultimately sell the parts to the original equipment manufacturers, the OEMs, and they ship directly to the assembly plants and go on the cars that we drive every day.
Awesome. Well, Troy, up to this point, this podcast has focused mainly on inner Convention of States related information for our audience. We've given them a solid background about what Convention of States is all about. So let me ask you this. When Kelly first started getting involved with Convention of States, what were your initial impressions?
I had kind of mixed reactions. My initial impression was, how can you make a difference, right? It's a grassroots foundation, a grassroots movement. What difference can one person make? So as we started talking about it, doing more research, I looked on the social media. I follow Convention of States on Instagram, and watching all of the states now passing the movement and all of the attention that it's getting on a lot of shows like Ben Shapiro and Mike Huckabee. It's been really, really interesting to watch.
So this particular topic that we wanted to bring you on for, knowing that you are such an expert in this area of the automotive industry, and obviously it's particularly pertinent and important here specifically for our Michigan audience. So how is the automotive industry unique to Michigan? How many people does it employ? Can you give us a description of what the automotive industry looks like for Michiganders? How dependent is Michigan's economy on the auto industry? Can you give us kind of your 30,000-foot view of the auto industry here in Michigan?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you say automotive in the United States, everyone thinks of Detroit. It started in Detroit. The heart is always in Detroit. Even the new plants that people are talking about are all centered in the greater Midwest area. So the auto industry employs 1.7 million people in the United States. 50,000 of those people are in Michigan specifically. But moreover, indirect employees are 6.3 million people in the United States. So those are the logistics providers, the sequencers, the people that assemble parts that go just in time to the assembly plants. And there are 1.1 million of those, which is in the state of Michigan, which is 20% of the workforce in the entire state.
So it's 20% of the economy for here in Michigan?
Of the entire workforce in the state of Michigan. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's a huge number.
Yep.
I didn't realize it was that high.
Well, Troy, you've mentioned that you handle the many aspects of the process of getting a vehicle built, from getting the parts tooled, welded, box shipped, getting those parts shipped to the vehicle manufacturers, getting them tested, assembled. What are some of the biggest hurdles you are having to deal with?
It's funny, we joke in the industry that every year is marked by a crisis. So 2022 has been inflation. 2021 was the semiconductor shortage that I'm sure everyone heard about. 2020 was COVID. 2019 was the General Motors strike at the end of the year. 2018 were Donald Trump's tariffs coming from Canada and China. So every single year we seem to have some sort of economic hurdle from an outside factor. But moreover, really the biggest risk to the industry currently are federal regulations. So we are in the middle of the greatest transformation of the automotive industry since Henry Ford put a combustion engine in a horse buggy. The vast majority of which are being driven by CAFE standards in the federal government. And CAFE, I had to write this one down. CAFE is the corporate average fuel economy standards for the vehicles. So no matter if you build a Prius or if you build the biggest Chevy 1500 pickup, their fleet average for sales of a vehicle from the first act of Congress in 1975 through today and up through 2026 has been increasing. So the vehicles are required to get more efficient. Joe Biden just passed the latest regulations for 2024 to 2026, and the fleet average of vehicles has to be 49 miles per gallon. So if you think about what your current vehicle is capable of, small SUVs, maybe low mid 20s, the only way that's going to be capable to get to that higher point is to go to electrification. And the electrification has all of its ins and outs of it, but everything is driven by CAFE standards. And what that's doing is causing the automakers to spend billions of dollars from a political standpoint to develop those electric vehicles just to get their fleet average up. General Motors back in the day said that every Chevy Volt that went out the door, they lost $15,000 on. That was only to get their CAFE standard up and not to have a profitable vehicle.
So these CAFE standards, this is something that's been around since the 1970s, you said?
Yep, 1975.
Okay. And have you guys seen, or if you know, because obviously you haven't been in the industry for that long, but are you aware, has every federal administration or every president increased those standards every year, or has it just been at certain times, or certain things that have driven it, or anything like that?
That's a good question. They change for every administration that's in the White House, and they would change by political lines that you would think. So I don't have the exact numbers, but when the Obama administration was in, they became more stringent, requiring vehicles to become more efficient faster. And when the Trump administration came in, they relaxed those standards.
So they've gone back and forth. Correct.
And one of the things that I don't think government really realizes, right now, as we sit here, I'm working on 2025-26 programs. The model year lengths that are out there, or the product cycles, are so long that by the time they become into production, that whatever the technology is obsolete. So Joe Biden's administration wants the average to be 49 miles per gallon by 2026. That has to be enacted right now as we sit here, because I'm already working on 2026 programs.
Wow. Wow.
And so I'm hearing you say to a lot of, you're naming off presidents. Is this all federal stuff, or is this at the state level too?
As far as I understand it, it is at the federal level, driven through the EPA and federal CAFE standards.
So what I'm hearing you say is that these CAFE standards and the decisions that are made are what's driving the building of the cars and the marketing of the cars, and really has nothing to do with the people who are going to buy the cars.
That's absolutely correct. The most in-demand vehicles right now are large trucks and SUVs. So the best-selling vehicles are the Ford F-150, the Chevy 1500, the Chevy Tahoe, and then you kind of go down from there, but you go down the insides from the vehicles. And moreover, the OEMs, the automakers, are using those vehicles to fund the research and development to build these electric vehicles. They've come outright and said it.
I've seen the prices of some of these new cars coming out in the electrical vehicles. It's about as scary as going out and buying a nice steak today. They're really, really pricey.
Yeah, my last market update that I wrote for our business owners, we joked that it was always coming, but the GMC Sierra heavy duty 3500 dually pickup, the Denali Ultimate level trim, just passed $100,000.
Oh,
And those levels of profit will be funding the development of the electrification so that they can come out with an Equinox that's sub $30,000.
well, Troy, from your position and where you sit and your experience, what suggestions do you have for solutions for improving the resiliency of the auto industry for Michiganders?
That's a very difficult question to answer. I would say that you have to choose what administration that you agree with. I mentioned the administration really drives the CAFE standards.
Mhm.
So if having no tailpipe emissions is important to you, then the electrification move is important. If that's not something that's as critical and you feel like everyone should have the freedom to choose what vehicle that they want to drive, and if you want to drive that $100,000 GMC pickup, then you should be able to. But the thing that most people don't do is connect the dots or look beyond the fact that the electric vehicles don't have tailpipe emissions. You know, I wrote down some facts, but my favorite is that the CO2 emissions that it takes to mine the minerals and build the battery, just the battery, not the vehicle, is equivalent to 135,000 miles in an internal combustion engine car. So for the average American, that's 10 years worth of driving just to make the battery that goes into an electric vehicle. Now that doesn't take into account that the electric vehicles still produce a third of the emissions of the tailpipe. So they do have emissions associated with them because it uses electricity. And most of the electricity in the United States comes from coal or natural gas still, right? So you have to think about that. Then you have to think about the minerals. There are 3 minerals used in EV batteries that are not used anywhere else in an internal combustion engine car. And that's lithium, cobalt, and manganese, nickel. And let's see, manganese and graphite are currently imported from China to the United States.
Oh,
Yeah, that is actually going to be my next question, is where do all of those different minerals and things come from? Are we seeing it? Is it employing people here in the US? Are we seeing, kind of mining of those things and using those things here in the US? Or is it mostly stuff that's having to be imported from outside countries?
It's a little bit of both. The United States, the automakers have been announcing agreements with mines in the United States, California, and then also in Canada as well, for mainly the lithium. A lot of cobalt comes from countries that are conflict minerals, if you will, for various social reasons. But currently, as we sit here today, 70% of the capacity to make EV batteries is in China. So until we put plants in, which everyone's talking about doing and has been, so GM is putting a plant in Michigan and in Tennessee. Ford just announced a plant. I can't remember. I think it's in Indiana or Illinois. So everyone is building those EV battery plants. But until that capacity comes into place, which everyone seems to be kind of 2030 is probably the mark where that capacity will be up and readily available with the minerals that they've secured because of the lead time for the equipment and everything else.
so another question comes to my mind. What is the expected lifespan of one of these EV cars?
That's a great question. Really, when you look at it, Tesla is really the only one that has high mileage vehicles out there that are over 100,000 miles. There have been some hybrids that have the battery technology in. Chevy has the Volt and now the Bolt with a B. But there really isn't an idea of how long they'll last, especially in cold climates and things like that. But there are headlines out there of people that have repair costs for these batteries of $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 on a vehicle that was $60,000 to start with. So it's half the cost of the vehicle just to have a battery replaced. And then, as a business owner, you have to look at, because we have 7 cars on the road. what's the depreciation curve if you were to look at a vehicle that maybe has 150,000 lifespan versus 300,000. So it's the economics from that standpoint are still probably to be found out.
Are you finding or maybe you can't answer this yet, but are you finding as a general rule that EV vehicles are well suited for society in general? Are we moving in the right direction to at least trying to be using EV vehicles? Or in your opinion, are internal combustion engine vehicles probably still the better vehicles to be driving?
Another great question. Really, you have to look at the household and how your vehicles are used. So in my case, we have companies all over the Midwest. So I drive 500-600 miles in a day. It's not very practical for me to do that because I would be pulling over at a rest stop, charging for a couple of hours, and then getting back on the road. So from that point, it's not very practical. I drive 25,000 miles a year. So it just doesn't make sense. Someone like you who drive 8 to 12,000 miles a year and you're home every night with that vehicle, it probably makes perfect sense. So the EVs have been basically doubling their market share for the last 5 years. I expect that trend to continue probably for another 2 years, and then it will start to plane out. And I would expect most American households by 2030, 2035 to be 50% EV, and it will probably stay there.
So you think probably about half, and then it'll start to maybe max out at that.
Yep.
Okay. Are you finding that that's generally the market actually driving that demand, or is it still, are we going back to the government regulation thing? Is it government regulation that's driving it?
It's going to be government regulation. So it's going to come to the point where you literally don't have a choice of vehicles. You're not going to be able to buy whatever the brand or vehicle is in an internal combustion engine.
Oh, wow.
You will be forced to.
That makes me uncomfortable.
It should, right? Because I don't know if you've either ridden or gone on a road trip in an electric vehicle, but the infrastructure to charge, unless you have a Tesla, is not there. So it's very unpractical to do that right now, and probably will be for at least 2 more years.
I guess I just don't like the idea of limited choices for myself personally. I am not opposed to helping keep the environment clean, but you bring up a lot of points that I've read about that I'm shaking my head on why we're being pushed in this direction so quickly and investing so much money for it. Maybe I won't buy another car in the next 10 years. As you were saying this, I'm thinking, boy, I'm going to take good care of the car that I have so that I don't have to go out and be forced into a situation.
The automakers are actually taking advantage of that fact. So Dodge has been very outspoken that their next generation of muscle cars will be electric, and they are literally marketing the last generation of Challengers and Chargers as last calls. If you want a high horsepower, loud, fast, muscle car, this is it. This is your last chance. And they are going for $10,000 or $20,000 over sticker price right now, because this is it.
Wow.
It's interesting that clearly the demand is still there for the loud cars, for those internal combustion cars. Clearly the demand is there because the prices are reflecting, like you just said, going up so much above sticker price, but yet we're like just forcing it to go in the other direction. It just blows my mind that we're not leaving it up to the market to be able to do this. We're just leaving it to government regulation.
Well, it's always been that way, though. If you look, I can't remember the exact year, but I think it was probably around 2006 or 7. The environmentalists, probably led by someone like Al Gore back in the day, they targeted the GMC Hummer H2. It got 8 miles to the gallon on a highway with the wind behind it. I mean, it was just an obnoxiously inefficient vehicle, but they were popular because they were big, they were fun to drive, they could go through anything. But again, it was a politicized target of a vehicle just to make an example of something, and they went after it. And through the bankruptcies in 2008 and 9, they ceased to exist. And now, probably in a form of irony, the new GMC Hummer is a 10,000-pound electric vehicle.
Well, this has been a very enlightening and an informative conversation, Troy. I appreciate that. And I have a feeling that we could sit here and discuss these and interject personal opinions all day long, but it looks like we don't get to decide the future, that it's been decided for us when it comes about the kind of cars that we drive.
Yeah, it's certainly, we're certainly being pushed in that direction. The good news is, I think that the automakers recognize the fact that those high demand vehicles that I mentioned, the F-150, the Silverado, the Yukons, the Tahoes, they're not going anywhere as far as we can see. They may come out with an electric version of that, but those high profit, high demand vehicles will still be around. It's just going to be the smaller vehicles. For someone like Kelly that drives less than 10,000 miles a year will be electrified. And I think that's where that maybe that practical side or that little bit of common sense will come into play, where you've got a road trip vehicle and then you've got your kind of everyday vehicle.
Well, thank you for joining us today, Troy. And as all of you can see in our audience, having a convention of states to propose amendments to the U.S. Constitution would return some of that state sovereignty to Michigan and would potentially eliminate some of that red tape that we see coming out of Washington, D.C. and would allow Michigan businesses and Michigan small business owners to be able to operate within Michigan's economy and Michigan's rules, not bureaucrats coming from Washington, D.C.
Thank you both, Troy and Kelly, for this discussion today. And to our Michigan audience, it's your turn. Chances are you are someone or someone you know works in some capacity of the auto industry. Washington, D.C. bureaucrats are controlling your fate. When we ask who decides, Troy just gave us the answer about the kind of cars we drive. The Convention of States project is the only solution to legally and peacefully curb the federal government. Our Michigan Convention of States team is working to join the national effort of holding a Convention of States under Article 5. We invite you to get involved. Begin by signing the petition and then become a volunteer. It's going to take small efforts by every one of us to stop this creeping bureaucracy into our life. You'll find all the links to sign up to volunteer on the screen. When you have questions, please send them our way by emailing askmi@cosaction.com. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/MISH4 Convention of States. That's for as represents Michiganders for Convention of States. All of our podcasts will be published with there. So please take an action. We cannot sit by idly any longer and do nothing. Thanks for joining us. Share the news and stay with the fight.